हरि नित्ये
नित्यानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. Nityanandam, and welcome to this morning's episode of Living Advaita. Once again, the theme for the recorded satsang was seeking. And in this one, Swamiji gave such a sweet tip to all of us. When there's some boon or something that we want from existence, if we just cry, if we just complain, if we just whine about what we want because we want it, existence can put our request on the back burner, can ignore it. For example, if somebody's having stomach pains, if they're crying and complaining internally, oh, my stomach hurts, please make this go away, that request is going to be quiet in the cosmic ear. But if a person feeling stomach pain takes the initiative to question why the entire humanity is plagued by a stomach which can feel pain, why pain for people, that person's request, that person's question to existence is amplified. Swamiji explained the Cosmic Mother has to attend. He said this is how we can throw a temper tantrum to existence. Instead of just having a single pointed theme to our prayers, to our requests, to our questions, the moment we include the entirety of people as a whole in what we're asking, the more power go behind our words. So this idea of throwing a temper tantrum with existence, it's partly about breaking that mold of selfishness and coming to a place of realizing if I'm suffering like this, others are naturally also suffering like this. Why is this suffering happening? In a previous discourse, Swamiji used an example out of the life of Buddha. He said that when Buddha was seeking his enlightenment, when he saw a beggar in the street, impoverished, when he saw an elderly person, a sick person, a dead body, he didn't revert to the typical human interpretation of seeing these sad cases. He didn't say, what kind of a bad omen is this for my life, and get scared about its implications on him. Instead, he questioned why this kind of suffering exists for people. Why are humans plagued to this? This is like the differentiation between an ordinary question and a question that comes from the space of seeking. If it's just ordinary questioning, it's going to be very selfish, very limited, very individualistic. But this concept of seeking, it ties right into what Swamiji is teaching us about Advaita, this realization of oneness with all. When you're in that space of Advaita, you won't be able to tolerate anybody else's suffering. You'll immediately, if you feel a pain within yourself, your first priority, your first question will be, how can I put an end to this for everyone? Swamiji gave a beautiful analogy that if a child asking for something just for himself is crying and crying, eventually after finishing whatever she was doing, the mother might come over to that child and ask, what do you want? And toss him some candies, give him something to keep him quiet. But if a child is seeking, if a child is asking for something on behalf of everyone, the mother will rush to him before he even finishes asking and do whatever needs to be done to keep him quiet. If you want to create like a stir in the cosmos, if you want your prayers and your intentions to be answered as quickly as possible, that immediate response, really again and again re-watch the recorded satsang that was played today. Let all of these satsangs Swamiji is giving about seeking, I think we should have one playlist just for these. Maybe I'll post the links to all of them today in the Living Advaita Facebook group, because each one is so filled with priceless information. We should watch them again and again and again. Now, the main topic that I'd like to cover in today's episode of Living Advaita, because I've had some very interesting questions pop up in my Facebook inbox about this, always on the inbox about this subject matter, never on the timeline, never in response to something public. I've had a lot of people asking me, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate language for a sannyasi? And what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior for a sannyasi? Recently, there's a beautiful new trend happening in Nityananda Sangha that through Swamiji's blessing, we are no longer tolerating the intolerant. Now, what does it mean to tolerate the intolerant? When somebody is violently opposed to what you know is truth, what you experience as reality, what you hold as precious and dear to yourself, when somebody is trying to destroy something that you hold as precious, that you know is precious, sitting back and allowing that person to destroy it is himsa, it's violence. It's violence against your own belief. It's violence against your own knowledge, violence against your own experience, violence against reality. Swamiji recently spoke about Atmahana. Actually, in one of the recorded satsangs, it feels like it was recent because these recordings are so alive. Even when we watch a recorded discourse, it's like literally Swamiji is right there in front of us, giving it new. Actually, this is one of the mystical powers of Swamiji's Vak, the way he delivers information. Every time you hear Swamiji speak, even if it's a recorded satsang you've heard 10 times before, 20 times before, 100 times before, each time we listen, we catch something new. So in that sense, recently Swamiji was speaking about Atmahana, killing the soul, killing the consciousness, killing the Atman. And he said, naturally, we know intellectually the Atman cannot be killed, can't be burned by fire, drowned by water. It's beyond touch, it's beyond reach, it's beyond death, it's beyond destruction. But yet there's a term in Sanskrit that was used in the Upanishads, Atmahana, killing the soul. Swamiji said, any action we take that is against life, saying no to life, saying no to consciousness, saying no to seeking, that's Atmahana. Now, when somebody comes in attacking you, attacking what you stand for, attacking your God, your guru, when somebody comes to you with that kind of a violent approach against what your Atman knows is the ultimate, it is saying no to life if you sit back and allow that attack to happen. When Swamiji's mission was attacked by media, by who knows what other political influences, some atheist groups or some missionary groups, when that attack happened, it would have been Atmahana. It would have been actually even something worse than Atmahana. For me personally, I feel it would be like Guru Droha. If we don't stand up and defend in whatever way we can what we know is right, what we know is truth, what we know is reality. When there's an attack happening against something that we hold as precious, if we allow that attack to happen, what kind of a dharma do we claim to be living? There's one scene in the Mahabharata. Somebody's father is being persecuted, being questioned, being tried. The son sits back and ignores it, and later his teacher asks him, where was your dharma when your father was up there being ridiculed? Dharma, ahimsa, so right actions, living in accordance with the cosmic law, and living with non-violence, living without causing injury to others. That doesn't mean sitting back and allowing others to injure us. It's actually there in the Vedas. I'll have to find the exact scriptural references for all of you guys to share at some point. But there's actually a Vedic reference that says ahimsa means don't be the aggressor, don't attack somebody else, don't kill something, don't kill anyone, don't go out of your way to cause injury. But if you are attacked, if a wild animal comes charging at you, it's your responsibility to stop it by whatever means necessary. If somebody is attacking you, you have to defend yourself, you have to fight back. Otherwise, imagine if somebody comes up to you slowly picking away at you with a knife, if you sit there passively and let them do that to the point of your death, can't you say that's a suicide? If you know very well that you could have overcome them, if only you had stood up with some force and stopped the hand that's stabbing. When somebody attacks us in any way, if we don't stand up to defend ourselves, we're basically giving away the power we're basically admitting, see, I don't really care about this that much. You can take it, you can spit on it, you can destroy it, you can kick it, you can go 1, 2, 3 on it. If we don't stand up to defend something, then we have no right to claim that we have value in that something. Now recently, the reason these inbox messages have been popping up, people have noticed that many of us here in the Sangha, we respond with the same language the attacks come in. We'll respond to an intellectual argument with the intellect. We'll respond to a cheap, low-level argument with some cheap, low-level attacks back. You have to speak into the listening the other person has. Speak into their listening. Give them something they'll understand. Reflect back to them the level of consciousness or the level of ignorance they're projecting out there into the world. This is what cracks people. It's what wakes them up. It's what shows them their inauthenticity. I have one page in Facebook, one group called Nityananda University. And it's specifically a group for those who have declared that they're going to start their own YouTube channels, who are going to start enriching the world basically on the world stage in a bigger way than just one-on-one chatting with people. Because basically when you make a YouTube video and you put it out there, there's the possibility for billions of people to see it. Anybody with an internet connection, if they type the keywords from your video into a Google search, your video could come up. So I posted in that group recently, there's a possibility if you put your video out there, you're talking about Swamiji, you're talking about the Vedic tradition, you're talking about Sanatana Hindu Dharma, there's a great possibility that somebody is going to leave a negative comment at some point on one of your videos. The reason it's a great possibility, Swamiji has told us time and time again, those who are negative, those who have an agenda against us, those who are destructive in the world, they don't rest. For whatever reason, I don't know why it's like this on planet Earth, but those who are destructive and negative seem to get more of a rise out of shaking the foundations of those who are good than those who are good have for going out there and starting to build the spiritual foundations for those who would rather shake. For whatever reason, those who want to tear down what's good are more active than those who want to build it up. Now, a lot of people, when they start becoming more public about their spirituality, be that their vegetarianism and veganism, whether that means starting to wear kumkum and vibhuti and rudrakshas on a more regular basis in their day-to-day lives, even in the West, whether that means posting Swamiji's beautiful pictures and quotes on Facebook, there's an initial hesitation for a lot of people to become outspoken about what they truly know is right. There's that initial level fear of how other people are going to respond, what others are going to do when they see that strength, that passion for spirituality. Part of the reason for that is that the socioeconomic climate that we're born into is materialistic. First and foremost, it's a materialistic climate. The very fact that socio is blended with economic, when we talk about the various world systems, the various countries, the various places, the various ideologies, shows the level of sickness that has seeped into the human mindset. If we just said socio-religious, socio-political, socio-spiritual, any one of those would be better, especially socio-spiritual. Imagine if that was the gauge by which we defined a society. But if you open almost any newspaper in the world, if they're giving a description about another country, another people, another ideological group, they'll talk about their socio-economic structures. That means first and foremost, the priority for the majority of people on planet Earth is accumulating material possessions, accumulating a bank balance, getting more zeros on the screen in front of them when they check their balance. If you start telling people like that about the glory of aparigraha, living with a minimal of possessions, if you talk to them about the glory of asteya, non-stealing, not trying to grab or covet other people's things, not trying to tear down the competition, just standing up and building something. If you tell people about these great spiritual truths, a lot of the times your speaking is going to fall on deaf ears. But also sometimes your speaking is going to fall on ears that are planning their attack even before you finish speaking what you have to share. When those attacks come, how are you going to handle them? That's going to define whether you're living from a place of Advaitic activism, Hindu activism, or passiveness, laziness, lethargy. The don't care attitude, Swamiji tells us, is toxic. When somebody attacks something you love, you have every right and every responsibility to attack back, to defend yourself. Recently, Rajiv Malhotra, one of the great living voices of Sanatana Hindu Dharma, who has authored many books, many articles, who's based, I think, in Princeton, as one of the leading intellectual authorities on the Vedic tradition, modern Vedic, reviving the Vedic tradition. Recently, he visited the Nityananda Bengaluru Adinam, and he answered some questions from new ashramites here, people who have recently come, myself included. One of the questions he was asked, somebody in our group asked him, why is Hinduism attacked again and again and again? Hindus have never gone out into the world trying to start a war. Hindus are a non-aggressive people. Why do other countries, other groups, like the Islam group, like the invaders, why do they come and attack us physically? Why did the Mughals destroy our ancient kings and queens and take us over? Not ancient, I guess about 1,000 years ago to a few hundred years ago. Why did this happen? Why do the Christian missionaries come in and try to destroy our ideology? He answered that question so perfectly. He said, by nature of the fact that you're asking, why did we get attacked? It means you're taking it personally. You're not taking it proactively. He said that if we understand our enemy, understand our opponent in any game, imagine it, he gave the analogy that it's a sports game. If you're playing hockey against somebody else and you ask, why is that opposing team constantly trying to advance at us on the ice, pushing us out of the way, trying to get the puck into our net? He said that's the victim mentality so many Hindus are stuck with. He said if we're asking why do they constantly try to attack us, it means we're weak. He said one of the big problems is this victim mentality. He said we have to look and find out what motivates others. He said for the Islamic invaders, when the Mughals came in, physically with brute force, we should have understand their scriptures that literally tell them to kill anybody who doesn't believe what they believe, that literally tell them to expand their borders, acquire more land, take, steal, rape, ravage. If we had understood that their scriptures said that, we would have known how to empower ourselves to fight and to battle them. Actually, I think the greatest example of Hindu warriors would be the Naga sadhus. That sampradaya, Swamiji has told us so many amazing things about them. Single-handedly, this group from the Akhada went with weapons to defend India's borders during this Mughal invasion. The Sikhs also did a great job in the north, trying to push them back and battle them. This has to be done. If somebody is physically attacking you, you have to fight back. As far as the Christians are concerned, the same thing. If we read their scripture, they have been convinced, I want to use the word brainwashed. They've been brainwashed to believe that every single human being who takes birth on planet Earth, they don't even use the word takes birth because they don't believe in the choice. Every single human being born is born a sinner because in ancient prehistoric times, the two first human beings sinned against God by eating an apple. And as a result of that, whether that act was an analogy for sex or whether that act was to be taken literally, different groups of Christian theology debate that. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which one is originally implied by their book, because either one, as far as I'm concerned, is ridiculous. The fact that they did this, then their idea of God cursed the entire of humanity eternally, that every single child born in their lineage is born a sinner, that's the worldview. That's the idea that they have about humanity. Now, in their religious belief, the only way somebody can be absolved from that original sin, the only way somebody can hope for salvation, is if an incarnation of God suffers and dies for them. Suffers meaning withstands torture, bears it while others are beating him, spitting on him, putting a crown of thorns on his head, tearing his body apart with whips, and then killing him on a cross. They believe the only way somebody can claim not to be a sinner is if they let their God suffer this kind of huge torture for them. And at that point that they say, yes, he suffered and died for me, at that point that person has hope for salvation. But even after that, their religion is a system of laws, of rules and regulations, do's and don'ts. Thou shalt not this, thou shalt not that, thou shalt not the other. They have to follow those rules and laws. If they break those rules and laws, they have to go to somebody who's appointed as an authority and tell them what they've done and beg for forgiveness. And then they get some kind of a punishment, say this many of that prayer, go do this, go do that. It's a confining system. Now within that system, because they're convinced that every single person on planet Earth is a born sinner, and the only hope they have for salvation, meaning if they don't admit that their God came down, suffered, and died for them, if they don't agree to that, they're going to suffer for eternity in hell. They're going to be burned and tortured and abused non-stop for the rest of existence. Because they've been convinced that that's true, they actually think that they're doing service in the world by coming to places that haven't heard about their book and teaching them. They think that it's helpful to other people because they don't want these poor, godless sinners to be condemned to an eternity of hellfire just because nobody told them the so-called good news. Rajiv Malhotra, he explained all of this so perfectly. He said for Hindus have such an expanded, intellectual, brilliant understanding of reality as it is, of truth, that Hindus have never felt the driving, burning urge to go out and fight with anybody else. Because the truth remains the truth whether people believe it or not. It's not about belief, it's about what it is. But for these Abrahamic religions, especially Islam and Christianity, it's literally ingrained in the Islam belief system. If somebody doesn't believe what you believe, kill them and take what they have. It's literally ingrained in the Christian belief system. If somebody doesn't believe what you believe, convert them, convince them, make them drop whatever they've been following before and save their soul. The energy that goes behind the conviction that they have to do this or their God will be angry with them is the motivation they have for invading other countries, killing and raping women for the Islams, convincing and converting people for the Christians. For the Hindus, what this means is we're basically here ready for whatever they're going to do unless we empower ourselves intellectually to know why they're doing it. Rajiv Malhotra said, in any strategic battle, understanding your opponent is what's going to determine whether you win or you lose. And he said, for far too long, Hindus have looked at their history and said the reason our culture was dismantled or the reason our religion has suffered and has dwindled. In today's recorded satsang, Swamiji referred it as to the attempted murder of Hinduism. There was an attempted murder. If we constantly look at it from the why me, why our culture, why our country, why our religious tradition, why our beliefs, we're not active. We're not doing anything to defend ourselves. But if we understand why they've been attacking, we understand also how we can stand up and fight back. Now, Mr. Malhotra, he gave such a great explanation of a way we can practically do this. He said 2 missionaries once knocked on his door and asked him, have you heard the good news? He knew exactly who they were. He knew they were missionaries. So he played with them a little bit at first. He said, "What, has the stock market gone up? Did you win the lottery? What's the good news?" And they said, "No, the good news is, even though you're born a sinner, you have hope for salvation if you accept the sacrifice Jesus Christ made on the cross." And he said, "Oh, that good news. Yeah, I've heard that. That's the Christian good news. But have you heard the Hindu good news?" And he said the two kind of furrowed their brows a little bit and looked at each other and said, "There's Hindu good news." "No, we haven't. What's the Hindu good news?" And he said, "The Hindu good news is this. You're born divine. You've forgotten your divinity, but there's hope for you to remember your divinity again and rise into the ultimate realization of oneness with God, who did not send you down here to condemn you as a sinner, but who in fact is eternally one with you and ready to bring you back into that realization of oneness through incarnating again and again, not to suffer and die for your stupid so-called sins, but as a wake-up call to show you your higher possibility." He said that it was so obvious. These two people had never heard that before. It was probably the first time anybody actually showed them what Hinduism is. And he said the biggest problem intellectually right now in human society is that those who don't ascribe to any religious belief system have a tendency to talk about all religions are the same. Ultimately, they're all taking you the same place. Ultimately, they all have the same general foundations, the same general belief. That's a lie. He explained so perfectly. There is absolutely no way to unify and to show that Christianity and Hinduism are saying the same thing. The Christian belief is that human beings are by nature flawed. Human beings are sinners. God condemned us, and unless we accept that somebody who was an incarnation of God suffered and died for us, we're condemned to eternal hell. The Hindu understanding of reality is that human beings are divine. We're sparks of the one eternal infinite consciousness that is inherently good, that we forget that goodness in the Maya, in the cycles of birth and rebirth, but that ultimately we're rising back into oneness again. There's no such thing as hell. There's no concept of you're going to be sent to hell. There's only the truth that you'll be reborn again and again until you realize oneness with divinity once again. You can't say that these are ultimately leading you in the same place, because they're not. One is the truth, one is an illusion. Which one are you going to fall for, or which one are you going to rise into? Unless you're willing to stand up strongly as an advocate for what you know is reality, you're allowing those who are deluded to delude others. And that is not only Atmahana, that would be like Jagadhana, like killing the world, killing everybody. Swamiji says again and again his passion is for activism. He's not interested in having a sangha of people who are striving towards the realization of Suddhadvaita Shaivam. He's not interested in having us all strive for that just for ourselves in a bubble. He is ready to bring this great gift, the good news of Sanatana Hindu Dharma, to the world, because people are suffering. Now, the evening after Rajiv Malhotra ji visited Bengaluru Adinam and gave us this amazing question and answer session, that whole night the wheels in my brain were turning about everything he had said. And I realized the inherent sickness plaguing almost the entire Western civilization of our planet. Because the only religions that are taught in schools, we have two kinds of schools in Canada where I was born. We have Catholic schools and public schools. In the USA, I believe it's the same. You have the Catholic schools and the public schools. And very rarely you might have a private school that's not following either of those principles. You might have a private school with one or two classes representing other traditions. But basically it's Catholic or it's private. Now, because of that, the only concept of religion the majority of people in the West have is the Catholic worldview, the Catholic belief about humanity. The reason atheism runs so rampant in the West, the reason more than half the population calls themselves atheists, probably 60 or 70% of people call themselves agnostic, they don't know what to believe, The reason for that is that they have two choices. Either you're a sinner condemned to eternal suffering unless you kill and injure and maim your God through your sins, or nothing else really exists. The world is what it is. When you die, you're gone. That's it. These are the only two choices they're given. Christians have done a huge work. You have to admit one thing about them. They're organized. They're motivated. They've done a lot to spread their lies around the planet because they believe in the righteousness of their lies. They've done so much activism. They've touched almost every corner of the globe with their book, with their ideology. In the same way, Muslims have done so much in the world to destroy whatever doesn't agree with them. They're very active. Knowing what they're spreading, knowing the injuries they're causing, knowing the suffering that they're causing in the minds of people who should never be told they're sinners, what are we going to do? Are we going to sit back and let it happen again and again and again as it's happened in the past? Or are we going to also concert our efforts and stand up for what's right? Stand up for dharma. Swamiji said once, any of those so-called Gurujis who are taking from Vedamata, taking the truths from the Upanishads, from the scriptures, from the holy books, stories from the Puranas, taking all of this, if they're taking them and incorporating them into their teachings but not giving due credit where it's deserved to the Vedic civilization, to Sanatana Hindu Dharma, then all they're being are hanging roots on the tree of Vedamata. He said these hanging roots, they're dangerous for the tree because they're a dead weight. They're not doing anything. They're not grounded. They're not offering support. They're also dangerous for the root itself because a hanging root is subject to all kinds of external dangers. If there's a strong windstorm, that hanging root can be broken off and just fly away and wither, die. He said it's time to become grounded, to become a support for Vedamata. Now, being a support for Vedamata, what would be the goal for Vedamata? That would mean like the goddess of the Vedas, the mother of the Vedas. What would she want ultimately? She would want for truth to prevail, for reality to be understood, for people to understand what Rajiv Malhotra so beautifully called the Hindu good news. Let's be Advaitic activists. As Swamiji told us we should all be, even I think more than a year ago he coined that phrase, Advaitic activists, spiritual activists. Let's stand up for reality, let's stand up for truth. If somebody attacks Hinduism, let's take it personally. What would happen, just to put it into perspective, if you walked up to a practicing Muslim and you said, Allah doesn't exist, Allah is stupid, Allah is a toxic danger to society, Allah is ridiculous, what would you expect that person to do to you? I wouldn't dare risk that actually. I wouldn't walk up to a Muslim and say, Allah's stupid. I don't want to get cut with a knife. I don't want to be killed. I don't want my whole family to be put onto their hit list. You saw what happened to the poor cartoonists in France. Poor Charlie. We don't want that to happen to us, so we're not going to do that, go up to them and insult their concept of God. The same way, if you go up to a Christian and say, I don't believe Jesus Christ suffered and died on the cross for the sins of humanity. I think it was just an unfortunate thing that happened to an enlightened master. Maybe he was enlightened, I don't really know. If you say that to a Christian, get ready for the next 5 hours of your life to be spent listening to their logic, their rhetoric, their explanation, their apologetics, as it's called. Imagine that, apologetics. The way somebody represents their religion has the word apology woven into it. Thank God, thank Mahadeva, there's no such thing as Hindu apologetics. We know that if we attack somebody else's religious tradition, they are going to fight back, either with their violence or with their words. What are we going to do? We have to do the same. We have to spread the same. If you claim to care about consciousness, to care about divinity, to care about your master, your God, your guru. It's your duty, it's your responsibility. You have to stand strong. If somebody attacks using all kinds of colorful language, take even more colorful language and attack them back. If somebody attacks using theories and principles, if they're using some big words, thinking that it shows that they're intelligent, use even bigger words. Stomp their intelligence and show them your intelligence is ridiculous. It's not the truth. It's coming from a place of ignorance. You can dress up ignorance with great grammar, with beautiful prose, with flowing language. But even a piece of crap covered in flowers is going to stink. That's what it is if somebody's insulting Hinduism. They might sound so convincing. The convincingness, that's only the flowery language put on a pile of you-know-what. If we allow them to continue to do this, it's our fault. We're the ones who are responsible for the fact that humanity is still living in so much ignorance. Any of these problems in society. Actually, if you heard Swamiji's beautiful webinar about wealth, abundance, manifesting abundance, not yesterday's session, yesterday's session, it feels like so long ago because the days are packed full of so much here in Bengaluru Adinam. Each day here, what we accomplish in one day takes maybe 2 weeks in the outer world. Swamiji has really created a different frequency for his Sangha here. If you heard that webinar, one of the questions in the Q&A had to do with society. You know, because society feels this way, I've been suffering that way, what to do about it? Swamiji gave a powerful, updated definition of society. He said nothing called society exists. What we call society is just a reflection of the cumulative ignorance within everybody. So right now that cumulative ignorance is there giving people 2 choices in Western schools, Catholic or atheist. It's giving people 2 choices about religion, Muslim or Christian. It's giving people such a limited concept of what consciousness is. It's talking about the Puranas and calling them mythology. I actually spent a few days with 2 of my YouTube viewers, 2 of my friends who are Bollywood actresses. And the topic came up that one of them had been offered a role to play Goddess Lakshmi by the producers of Devan Ki Dev Mahadev. And I got so excited. I said, great, when are you going in? When are you going to find out if you got the part? And she said, no, I've already auditioned, but I turned it down. And I said, are you crazy? Why would you turn it down? She said that crown was really heavy. You know, I heard from the girl who played Parvati, she was getting so much neck pain partway into that serial. I don't want to be typecast as always playing a mythology role. I said, mythology? Who said it's mythology? And she said, that's what it is, right? We're plagued in a society where even a born Hindu looks at the Puranas, looks at the stories of Shiva and Devi, looks at the stories of Vishnu and Lakshmi, and thinks that they're fairy tales. When we know reality is what it is, we have to take the initiative to stand up and defend it. That poor girl got about an hour-long lecture from me about the difference between mythology and Purana. We have to do this. If we sit back and rest, it's too big of a loss. Actually, I should follow up. By the end of our conversation, she said she was really regretting turning it down because she found out it had already been recast to somebody else. She said, why couldn't we have had this conversation a month ago? It's a shame. But if we all decide to be Advaitic activists, nobody is ever going to say, I wish I had this conversation a month ago. If we're really active in our activism, if we decide to spread the Vedic truth now, Hinduism now, everywhere, if we declare proudly, I'm Hindu and I follow Nityananda everywhere, people are going to receive what Rajiv Malhotra calls the Hindu good news in time. They're not going to make stupid decisions. They're not going to commit Atmahana without even knowing that they're doing it. With the same ferociousness, the Islams are spreading hatred in the world, killing people, destroying people, tearing down infrastructure, bombing buildings, murdering those who are speaking with the freedom of expression. With that same ferociousness, if we stand up to defend Hinduism Imagine what a huge shift that's going to make in global consciousness. With the same passion Christian missionaries have to convince people of what they believe, thinking that they're saving souls, if we start to invoke that kind of passion to enrich people, to tell them what really exists, what's really possible for them, to tell them about the 400 divine powers revealed by Mahadeva in Kamika Agama that Swamiji is going to make available for people again this year, 2016. If we take that same zeal the zealots have to try to convince people of their beliefs, to just show people the reality, imagine. There's an expression in English about truth that the side that's speaking, excuse me, truth will always prevail. Truth prevails. That's the expression. Now, if we look at our history books, if we look at what's being taught to children in schools, even about American history, Columbus didn't discover America. He got lost looking for India. If that's taught to every child as part of their little song, instead of in 1492, blah, 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 blue, if the reality of what happened was taught, they'd be so ashamed of the idiot who stumbled upon their country and decided, through the people back home in his own country, to commit genocide to all the Native Americans, to kill them all and take what they had. Thanksgiving, it's another example of a very convoluted holiday. Kill a turkey to celebrate the fact that your ancestors committed genocide against an innocent, trusting people. If we look at the history books, it's hard to believe that aphorism, truth prevails. But if we look at the entire history of planet Earth, the entire history of humanity, from the Vedic view, with the knowledge of the cycles of time called Janmas, understanding that ignorance comes and goes on the planet, that seeking comes and goes on the planet, that wisdom comes and goes on the planet, if we realize that we're at the last days of Kali Yuga. In fact, I believe Swamiji said Satya Yuga already started. The 2012 shift was like the shift of those Janmas. We're entering Nitya Yuga, the eternal Satya Yuga. If we realize that this ignorance that has been prevailing, it's just part of the social climate conditioning of the Yuga that we're coming out of, we'll understand that there's no reason to be defeatists before we try. Even if all the history books in the world are proclaiming lies, one fire is enough to get rid of them. The fire of Vedic truth. And I'm not saying go out there and burn books. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But the fire of reality will burn away all of those dead leaves of lies. It's time for us to become as active as those who we claim were bullying us and abusing us. So the way that this relates to our own individual lives, if you're not born Hindu, don't think I'm not also talking to you. When you discover the Vedas, Swamiji said that what makes somebody a Hindu, it's not being born a Hindu, it's practicing Hinduism. So if you do pujas, if you tune into satsangs, if you're reading the scriptures, if you're chanting mantras, if you're wearing rudrakshas, putting on the kumkum and the vibhuti, then you're a Hindu. I'm also talking to you. Defend your tradition. Look at what people have done in the past to try to thwart it. Start getting active. Start spreading what you know. Don't be a dirty missionary trying to brainwash people, trying to convert people. Be a Hindu activist inspiring people. There was a very exciting day in Phuket, in Thailand, during this Nityanandoham 1008 program. There was a huge group of newcomers who were there meeting Swamiji for the first time, experiencing their first inner awakening. And one day during a question and answer session, one of those newcomers raised her hand, a Western-born girl, and she said, Swamiji, my question isn't about the process. My question is, how can I convert to Hinduism? And he laughed and said, convert? You want to convert to Hinduism? And she said, yes, Swamiji, I want to really be Hindu. Like your ashramites, I want to be a Hindu. And he said, okay, I'll tell you what to do. Ask me an energy darshan. The next person who picked up the microphone, also a Western person, said, Swamiji, I have a question, but first I also want to convert to Hinduism. After that, in that Q&A session, at least 5 or 6 people raised their hand and said the same, Swamiji, I want to convert to Hinduism. Finally, Swamiji said, okay, how many others are sitting here in this hall who want to become Hindu? Every single Western hand went up. Every single person in that hall who wasn't born Hindu raised their hand. They want to become Hindu. And Swamiji was laughing. He said to Magnianatma Swami, Ma, have I ever told this group you should become Hindu? And she said, no, Swamiji. He said, have I told anybody here you should convert? She said, no, Swamiji. He said, have I even implied that they should drop what they were born into and move into this? She said, absolutely not, Swamiji. And he said, this is what we mean by inspiring. Conversion is a conscious violence, telling somebody you have to do this or you're going to suffer with that. That's the conscious violence technique used by missionaries to force other people to adopt their belief system. But the way people become inspired to become Hindus, just seeing the power of the Hindu lifestyle, seeing the power of the way a Mahavatar, a Purnavatar, Swamiji, an embodiment of Mahadeva, seeing the way he lives, seeing the lifestyle of the people around him, being able to live without food, without sleep, but with the highest passion and excitement. Seeing this is what gives people the motivation to become that. Even we ourselves are continuously seeking. As Swamiji says, don't ever let the seeking die. Any part of you, one quote from today's recorded satsang, Swamiji said, any part of you that wants to be stagnant, kill it. Because stagnancy is dead anyway. Be active, 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 active. Expand your activism. Reach the entire world, because the Hindu good news is the best news, the greatest news, the only good news. Going around and telling people you're a sinner, your mother's a sinner, your brother's a sinner, your kids are going to be sinners, and only if God suffers and dies for your sins, you have hope for salvation. But even then you can keep on sinning, and then you have to ask forgiveness and beg forgiveness and tell somebody what you've done. How is that good news? That's like saying you're getting sent back to kindergarten and you're automatically going to be in the timeout corner because you're born a bad kid. That's not good news. That's like a death sentence. What's the Hindu good news? You're born divine. You come from divinity. The Purna mantra that I'll chant in just a few seconds to end the show. Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnamudashyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. You are whole. You may have been taken away from the whole, but the whole and this whole both remain whole. You're striving to realize that oneness with the ultimate original whole once again. You're not just a part. You're existence. You're divine. You are everything. Realizing that, you'll awaken all the powers, all the divinities, all the greatness of any God. What you worship, you become. You have the right to worship how you want. All of these great truths that are available only in Sanatana Hindu Dharma. If we don't make these available to the world, we're doing a huge disservice to the world. We are hoarding our wealth. Our wealth is the wisdom. Let's do what Swamiji is telling all of us to do, what he himself is doing. He's declared his mission is rooting itself, being a support for Vedamata, not just a hanging root. Let's all do the same thing. Let's be a support for Swamiji's mission, a support for Vedamata. Ultimately, this is the greatest service we can do for humanity. Be active in our Hinduism, and be Hindu activists out there. Don't let anybody abuse your tradition. Don't let anybody attack the guru who's bringing it into your life. Don't sit back and lay down if they want to stomp on us. It's time for us to stand up and to make this world realize Kali Yuga is no longer here. It's not the Dark Age anymore. It's time for Satya Yuga, Nitya Yuga. It's time to bring that greatest news, the light of the Vedas, back. So in the Living Advaita Facebook group, if you have any comments about this, any questions about this, any suggestions for how we can make this happen, or if you want to help out with spreading this by joining SMKT, by joining the order Sri Mahant Mahant Kotari Tanidar, the people who are active in Swamiji's Sangha, if you're not already in that group, let's chat about it. Let's see how to make it happen. Thank you for tuning in. And I'll see you again for tomorrow morning's Living Advaita, Nityanandam. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purna Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sarvam Satguru Padukar Panamastu. Om Nityanandam.